All right, so it appears like the Joe Biden administration is getting ready to triple down on exacerbating the single worst humanitarian crisis on the planet right now, and that is the ongoing Saudi-led blockade and bombing of Yemen. So I got a great breakdown here from Ken Klippenstein, who is reporting that the White House is apparently discussing reinstating Trump's terror designation for Yemen's Houthi rebels. And he says a terrorist designation for the Houthis could trigger devastating sanctions on Yemen. So let's just go ahead and jump into some of the details, and then I'll put it into more context in the broader picture of this war, and specifically the corruption within the military-industrial complex that continues to drive a lot of these things that have been happening. So Ken has to say, when Joe Biden came into office, one of his first moves was to reject the Trump administration's last-minute designation of the Houthis as a terrorist organization after warnings from the United Nations and aid groups that imposing sanctions could exacerbate the famine in a war-torn Yemen. And they say, quote, the revocations are intended to ensure that relevant U.S. policies do not impede assistance to those already suffering what has been called the world's worst humanitarian crisis, said Secretary of State Anthony Blinken in a statement in February of 2021. So they apparently are fully aware of the current situation and the dynamics that are unfolding, and their accountability or their culpability in this entire situation. And yet we have a complete 180 reversal. So now the Biden administration is considering reversing that reversal and redesignating the Houthis as a terrorist group at the request of the oil-rich UAE, despite what experts say would be disastrous consequence for the Yemeni people. And the Houthi rebels, who have controlled Yemen's capital since 2014, recently launched a rare attack on the UAE for its participation in the Saudi-led war in Yemen. And we're going to circle back to how this attack played a role in this, but understand the power dynamics here, okay? This strike that they're talking about, which again is incredibly rare of these Houthi rebels who did this airstrike in the UAE. They ended up killing, I think it was 3 people at the end of the day, and the response to that, the revenge response to that essentially from Saudi Arabia and the UAE was to turn around and go and bomb dozens and dozens of innocent Yemeni civilians, okay? So it's not a proportionate conflict here, just as in the case of like Israel and Palestine. You have one group that is supported militarily, logistically, with intelligence support by the most powerful empire in the history of the planet, the United States. They have far superior weapons capabilities, air force capabilities, etc. And you're comparing that with a much smaller force, and basically the consequences of this disproportionate nature in the power dynamics is significant catastrophic consequences for civilians in Yemen, okay? So basically reinstating the Houthi rebels as a terrorist organization would have disastrous consequences for the broader civilian population in Yemen. But he says Biden first brought up the possibility of redesignating the Houthis at a press conference on January 19th, saying, we are taking a close look internally within the U.S. government to determine what would best serve our national security interests, what would best serve our desire to be a partner to Saudi Arabia, to the UAE, and other countries that are threatened by these Houthi attacks, okay? Again, portraying the Saudi Arabian UAE coalition as if they are the ones being attacked by Yemeni Houthi rebels, okay? The entire war that is being waged by Saudi Arabia and the UAE and their coalition that they put together, it is an inherently offensive war, okay? They are the ones who are conducting these airstrikes, widespread airstrikes around Yemen, okay? Yemen and these Houthi rebels are largely acting in a defensive capacity, okay? They are the domestic population that is running the capital and has been running the capital since 2014, as they're saying. So basically, the war is already over. It's been decided, and the Houthi rebels have won. So the process now should be focused on a diplomatic effort to wind down the war and get the humanitarian aid to the civilian population in Yemen that is much needed. So they continue here, just finishing it off, saying that the White House appears to be seriously considering the change. And in late January, Biden's National Security Council circulated a memo exploring the possibility, according to a U.S. intelligence official and a think tank of official familiar with the matter. And the memo, a policy operations paper produced by the NSC, considers labeling the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization, specially designated global terrorists, or a combination of both. The two sources told The Intercept on the condition of anonymity, but they say that experts warn that either of these designations could usher in punishing sanctions, and both designations would likely make it difficult or impossible for non-governmental organizations to deliver humanitarian assistance to the country. And the major difference between the two categories is that the Treasury Department maintains the SDGT list and seizes the assets of any individuals or groups on it, whereas the State Department controls the FTO list. Okay, so again, some differentiating factors there, but basically what you got to know is if this move is taken by the Biden administration, it will restrict the access for a lot of these organizations to get humanitarian aid to innocent Yemeni civilians who desperately need it right now. Okay, so obviously a horrible idea, a terrible thing that Joe Biden's own administration, when they were first taking office, understood apparently, right? Just a reminder, they literally said this. I mean, they said, the revocations are intended to ensure that relevant U.S. policies do not impede assistance to those already suffering. So that was Anthony Blinken at the beginning of the Biden administration. And now, literally a year later, we're talking about back in February of 2021, they've done a complete 180 reversal, basically just bowing down to whatever the Saudi crown prince or whatever the UAE wants them to do. Okay, this is Joe Biden's administration genuflecting at the altar of these theocratic monarchies that are incredibly violent and incredibly repressive, and Joe Biden understands that. Okay, he literally ran on the campaign trail saying that he was going to make Saudi Arabia the pariah that they are. Okay, and now he's turning around and not only not making them a pariah, but he's reinforcing these relationships and siding with them as they are continuing what basically amounts to be a genocide of innocent Yemeni people. Okay, so again, just completely reversing something that he ran on the campaign trail on doing. Another thing that he said he was going to do is end the war. Okay, and we had this brazen lie that his administration came out with towards the beginning of 2021, where he said this war has to end. Biden halts U.S. support for offensive military operations in Yemen. Okay, so he said we're not going to be supplying them with offensive military weaponry or logistical support. But what this basically meant at the end of the day is not that they were ending offensive military operations or support. They basically just changed the way that they were defining what offensive means and basically just started to call everything that they were doing inherently defensive. Okay, typical tactic that has been deployed by the State Department many times before. But I mean, again, it's just so disingenuous to pretend as if you're going to bring about an end to this conflict and then turn around and do shit like this. Okay, this was just back in November of 2021. Biden administration approves a $650 million weapons sale to Saudi Arabia, and the Pentagon says enabling the kingdom to buy U.S.-made air-to-air missiles would improve the security of a friendly country, a very friendly country that likes to, wantonly bomb dozens and dozens of innocent Yemeni civilians. Okay, not a very friendly country if you ask me. But an important detail here that was part of this weapons sale and this weapons contract is the company that is producing these weapons and profiting off of this genocide, essentially. So they say it added that Massachusetts-based firm Raytheon Technologies would be the principal contractor. Okay, so we're going to circle back around to Raytheon and how the military-industrial complex plays a role in this decision-making process within the Biden administration and the people he has chosen to lead his, Pentagon, for example. But important to note here that Raytheon is going to be profiting off of this $650 million weapons sale. Now, again, I told you guys that there was a retaliation from the Saudi-led coalition after the Yemeni Houthi rebels struck the UAE with, a drone strike that killed a couple people, basically. And this retaliatory strike, or a couple of strikes that they launched against Yemeni people, killed dozens and dozens of people. So dozens killed in Saudi-led coalition air raid on Yemen prison, and at least 70 people killed in air raid on prison in northern city of Sadr, and dozens of others wounded. So this wasn't the only strike that they conducted. Again, they killed like migrants and innocent children. So, this was the response from this so-called friendly country when the UAE was attacked as a part of this ongoing war that, again, is inherently offensive from the Saudi-led coalition. Okay, they are the ones acting in an inherently offensive way, trying to dispose this government that has been holding the capital city since 2014. It's a war that just needs to end. Okay, Saudi Arabia, they are the ones who are doing the vast majority of the damage and the humanitarian damage in this entire equation here. So they are the ones who have a responsibility to end this war, and therefore, because we are the ones enabling and supporting them with military, logistical, intelligence support, we also have a responsibility to end this type of shit. And it's not just that they, struck some migrant detention facility or, struck a football field, which is a different thing that they did that killed a bunch of children, but it's not just that they're striking them, it's also that they're striking them with our literal weapons. Okay, so this just came out from Amnesty International just a couple days ago, or a couple weeks ago now. US-made weapon was used in the airstrike that killed scores in escalation of Saudi Saudi-led coalition attack. So the airstrike that we're talking about right here was literally used with, guess which weapons manufacturer it came from, bombs produced in the United States. So Amnesty International's arms experts analyzed photos of the remnants of the weapon used in the attack on the detention center and identified the bomb as a GBU-12, a 500-pound laser-guided bomb manufactured by, again, guess who? Raytheon Technologies. Now, the reason why I keep bringing up Raytheon Technologies specifically isn't because they're, inherently more evil than the other defense contractors are. They all are, equally pretty much across the board. But the reason why I bring up Raytheon Technologies is because of the corruption that exists within the Biden administration. I mean, he literally hired a former board member from Raytheon, okay, to lead the Pentagon. So here from a Bloomberg Biden defense pick to get up to $1.7 million payout from Raytheon role. So you have a retired general in Lloyd Austin who retires, goes to the private sector and works for a weapons manufacturer that literally profits from warfare, and then goes from that position, gets a multi-million-dollar payout deal from them, and then turns around and goes and leads the Pentagon. I mean, again, this is the revolving door of corruption that is somehow, accepted as normal in this country, but is absolutely psychotic if you actually think about it. This guy worked for a company, Raytheon Technologies, sat on the board, made millions and millions of dollars from this company, and then they turn around and they give them, contracts like this $700 or $650 million contract that gives Raytheon a bunch of authority to produce these air-to-air missiles or the bombs that are then used against innocent Yemeni civilians. Okay, so again, it's a story about corruption. It's a story about, on top of that, Biden somehow deciding that the Yemeni Houthi rebels need to be redesignated as a terrorist group, okay, which would do absolutely nothing but increase the likelihood of an exacerbation of the world's worst humanitarian crisis. So, at the end of the day, it's genocidal. It's absolutely psychotic that we continue to maintain this sort of relationship with Saudi Arabia or the UAE. We need to be aggressively pushing for an end to this war and a diplomatic solution to follow. And understand that all of the leverage in this situation lies with the president of the United States, okay? Joe Biden could, not in a very literal sense, but could basically end the war tomorrow, okay? If Joe Biden came out and he said, we're not going to send you any more, weapons, we're not going to give you any military, logistical, or intelligence support to continue this war, then Saudi Arabia would not be able to continue the war, okay? It's pretty much that simple. Along with that, if that doesn't work, you can add on diplomatic pressure and try to force them to end the war. But at the end of the day, all of the chips lie in Joe Biden's hands, okay? He can end this war if he wants to. It's just he's choosing to basically enable the exacerbation of the world's worst humanitarian crisis. He is enabling what amounts to be essentially a genocide where hundreds of thousands, if not millions of innocent civilians, including men, women, and children, are at risk of dying if this is continued. So, end the war. Joe Biden actually grow some balls and confront this violent theocratic monarchy instead of genuflecting and bowing to everything that they want you to do.